Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this debate, which is hosted by the Active Building Centre under the COP26 in association with the University of Gloucestershire. So I am Kamal Bechkoum. I'm the Head of School of Computing and Engineering at the University of Gloucestershire. I'm a Professor of Computing with interest in artificial intelligence and, of course, its applications to cyber security. Joining me today to discuss this very important matter of the role of digital in the drive towards net zero, we have put together esteemed colleagues who will be answering some of the questions. We didn't tell them what the questions are, so they will answer those questions, and you may have questions too. So we have with us today Dr. Ali Sherbaz, who is Associate Professor in Mobile and Network Security. Ali is Head of the Department of Cyber and Technical Computing at the University of Gloucestershire. We have Michael Pelken. Michael is a founding partner of London-based P+ Studio and Consulting and Innovation Director at Keltbray Group. He is also an experienced architect and innovator with a consistent 20-year track record of award-winning and patented developments in design, architecture, and engineering. We have Ron Cowley. He's the Chief Executive of the Active Building Centre. Ron is a qualified mechanical and electrical engineer. He has over 35 years experience at CEO level, working within UK and global corporations within the defence, nuclear, scientific and oil and gas sectors. Last but by no means least, we've got Peter Heather. Peter is from a company called Areten. He's based here at C11, and he has a strong background in IT and a significant experience with transformational change and IT project management in general. So perhaps we should start with the general question about the role of digital in driving the net zero agenda. In the words of Matti Jetta, who heads the sustainability at DEFRA, I think it was sometime around February 2021, when she was addressing an audience and said something like, research shows that technology can reduce 15% of global emissions, and we need to do it by 2050 to meet our net zero goals. We are setting ambitious targets and walking the walk. So that's the government view. But the private sector and academia also have a big role to play in innovation, particularly with data. So here is the government setting a challenge for the private sector and academia, and we have representatives from both sectors on the panel about playing a big role. So what is that role? What do you see your role within your organization in driving this net zero agenda? And we are focusing on the digital side of things. Shall I go in the way you are sitting and start with Ali?
Thank you very much, Kamal. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the ABC for providing this opportunity to talk about the net zero. I'm going to focus on the education part on this because this is my job, and how the universities can contribute, help. What is the role of the university in terms of contribution to the net zero? We provide to the society people and skills, and what we do now in terms of how to educate them, it's we teach them in terms of the computing, teach them how they develop an algorithm, how they write a code, how they deal with the hardware, with the software. And one of the most important skills we teach them is writing a code with a less computational power. And this less computational is a factor and one of the metrics which we compare between a good algorithm and not that good one. Or also we teach them something we call it optimization, because probably this is a tiny kind of power consumption if you think, but when we have a massive number of sensors and devices and we can reduce 1 milliwatt, for example, and that's multiplied by million, that's a huge number. That's 10,000 or 100,000 kilowatt. That's a lot. So that is our focus from what do we teach and what do educate our students from year 1 to PhD. That's one. So we do our job. Probably we have to do more work and work with other sectors to educate our students and our graduate that what you do actually when you develop this algorithm, the code, leads to the net zero. That we have to teach them and make it visible to them. Actually, what you are doing now is going to lead to have sustainable net zero, and that's to meet the global requirement now. In terms of other things we do, it's, for example, we are working now with a company like ABC and working with buildings, but active buildings, it's bringing devices to the building to make it intelligent, to make it, and that's a combination of software and hardware and small devices, and then we have to also bring the skills to the industry, right skills, so they can have in their mind, look, it's not only about connecting these devices, we have also a metrics to meet, which is the net zero, by reducing the power consumption, by reducing the less computational power per device. So make all the time this is a metric. Also, what we need to work hard with the industry is to have kind of standard and a CPD to develop our graduates to meet the standard on how the government do that. The other thing, the other point we do in our department or the university is the security and the cyber security. And security, to achieve a security level, it needs some power consumption. So we are teaching our students to choose the right security standard, the right security configuration per application, per layer. We can't always bring the best, the more complicated cryptography algorithm for a very small, because that's going to lead to a high power consumption, and that's what we have to compromise and make an optimum choice between security and the power consumption to meet the net zero requirement. And that's the summary of.
Thank you very much, Ali. Just before I go to Ron, for the layperson like me, Ali, what you're saying, the design of systems, software, hardware, etc., that you teach within the institution, you have sustainability embedded in the design. So it's sustainability by design rather than creating systems and then make them sustainable afterwards. That's what you're trying to get students to
we do have the concept of security by design. I think we need to highlight more of the sustainability by design.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Ron, how about your area?
The key thing for making an active building active is putting a brain in. I call it a brain, which is generally a computer or a Linux system. And the reason we have to put a brain into a home is to connect devices. There's many different type of devices, from solar cell to heat pumps to phase change materials, and each one of these technologies operate on different platforms and different coding mechanisms, and they don't talk to each other. It's apples for apples, pears for, they're not connected. So we can't get the optimized system to work and make decisions on energy flow in combination with the occupancy. So it's very important we develop a digital platform that is an open-based system, but also very secure. So it links all the different elements of the energy systems together. So it's optimizing, making the right decisions on energy. If there's people in the home, it says, I need some power. The AI and the machine learning thinks, okay, Ron's coming home, he has a shower when he gets in, making sure that there's enough hot water in. So we've taken the human side out of the active building and put it into a computer. That's very important because we can't do it without their ability of computing and, as Ali said, lots of sensors, which brings the threat attack of if we are putting an IoT platform into an MOD building, that is a great threat. So my colleagues, learned colleagues within the university and security services are working on safe systems of deployment so that them systems are safe and secure for the country.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron. You touch on a very important element there. Sometimes I call it the grand challenge, which is the hyperconnectivity, the data tsunami, and then artificial intelligence. And if we don't invest in these elements, particularly intelligent systems, to deal with the challenges which hopefully we'll cover later, then we might be going back. So one of the areas that companies like yourself are working on is to use those intelligent systems to reduce energy consumption or to have an optimum energy use whilst remaining secure, of course, when we're doing the data. Thank you very much indeed. Peter, how do we do it in your area?
Well, I think...
What's your role? What do you see your role and your company's role?
So I'm looking really at digital transformation and the projects that are happening now and happening over the last few years and how they could be applied when you're looking at the challenge of a net zero. So there's lessons to be learned in that digital transformation journey that can be applied. And looking as an example at the conference and the exhibition here, you've got people who are taking kind of gaming theory and visualizing things and looking at, say, that smart building, but actually visualizing it so you can see remotely what that looks like. So it's joining up really interdisciplinary kind of practices and taking good practice that has enabled transformational change to happen at scale and at pace. And I think there are lessons to be learnt in lots of other industries as well.
We'll cover that point. That's a very important point, Peter. But also, again, you mentioned the word interdisciplinarity. And that applies to any sector, including the sector that Ali comes from. It can be very challenging, actually, because if you want to train engineers, we focus on systems engineering or specific areas, but the world doesn't work like that. And they need to be trained to be working in a multidisciplinary environment. It's a challenge. We created a department of multidisciplinarity, but it's a challenge. It has different issues because the space where these learners are trained is limited, and we need to find ways around it. But multidisciplinarity is key in getting this correctly. Michael, your role within your organization, what do you see it as being in driving towards net zero?
So I'll pick up on the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, different ways of looking at it. So I'm representing 3 viewpoints here, actually. And I'll explain later maybe in the technology transfer discussion that we may have why I'm doing that. But I'm looking at this from different angles. So the first one, I think digitalization is absolutely key. And I'll go through 3 or 4 points I want to make for this introductory session. But we need to be more integrated. We need to be much better coordinated across disciplines and across sectors. And we need to understand our client base better. They need to understand as much as really what design means, what delivery means, and what the operation of buildings mean. And I think we're shifting into longer-term asset value mechanisms, let's call it that. And they don't function without evidence-based design. Evidence-based design inherently means data capture and different ways of working. So let me just stick to design for just a second. We need to do more of what we call predictive design. Predictive design means that the design foresees a certain performance-based design practice, And we need to start to really validate, and that's what Ron's talking about, in terms of having data capture post-occupancy to see if the assumptions that we're making are actually correct. So if we have more predictive and performance-based design practices, they then need to find their way, and this is the role I play in industry as an innovation director in a fast-growing and pretty large business that constructs anything from infrastructure, national infrastructure, down to 50-story tower buildings in London currently. So it's a very exciting place to be with Keltbray Group. And that is all about delivering in time, on budget. And again, that is becoming vastly complex if you think of low-carbon solutions. The integration of supply chain that is completely different than we probably saw it 10, 15 years ago. And we also need different data sets to do that. So there's a lot of pressure in the system. There's a lot of budget-driven conversations. But what we see really picking up is a carbon-based conversation. And there isn't really a cost conversation anymore without a carbon conversation attached to it. And we see a big shift. Again, we can't really have that conversation if we don't have a streamlined design delivery cycle and understand how we measure all of this stuff. Because currently we have different value systems and they're not necessarily well understood in themselves. And we're not comparing apples to apples. So we have different ways of calculating carbon. We have different ways of calculating quantities, which give us the base for carbon calculations. So there's a lot of sort of nebulous interfaces. When it comes to the delivery space, we're currently presenting a project across in the main exhibition, which was Innovate UK funded, and it's tackling several issues simultaneously. But the performance-based design aspects that go straight into delivery, where we have quality assurance on-site and off-site manufactured components that form a different set of challenges, are part of it. And again, if there's no flow from early stage design into the delivery and now with the active building center into longer term asset management, we can't understand how that really works. The last point is then getting into post-occupancy. What we're doing is, again, as part of this front-to-end data flow, is embed sensors in, for instance, foundation systems to understand how integrated energy systems work, how certain new materials perform. There's a big concern using low-carbon cementitious materials currently because they're fairly new. So data capture helps us, but what's the interpretation for the data? And if we have the data, can that data be generalized? So that's part of what we're doing from the academic side. So I'm a senior associate at Cambridge and a visiting professor at City University of London, where that becomes more of the academic research. And that's another part that I think is absolutely critical. The panel represents that, where we have to do more integrated work between academia, consultancy, and the delivery space. And the last one is that can heavily be supported by knowledge and technology transfer from other sectors. So I'll mention the tool development we're doing at Cambridge currently, but we're also doing it in the business, where we're drawing from visual analytics. We're using mixed mode reality to overlay, digital data sets that come out of BIM, building information modeling, increasing the BOM, bill of materials from manufacturing. So there's an awful lot, but in essence, my message would be we need to have a much more integrated way of working, and the digital is a strong backbone to that.
That's very helpful, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. Just before coming here, I gave a talk about cybersecurity, but I highlighted exactly that point of working together. Mm-hmm. This is not something one particular sector can deliver. I call it the hell and heaven scenarios. The hell scenario is where everyone thinks they can do it by themselves. And it's, imagine a long spoon. You've got the tools within your organization. It's just they will not be useful if you just use them within your organization. A long spoon you can't feed yourself. But if we work together, I can feed you, you can feed me with your spoon. And that's how it should be. It's this integrated approach. So it's both integration, multidisciplinarity, collaboration, and data. Michael, you mentioned data and data flow, and we'll have lots of that. How do we make sense of it, and how do we use it for a less or an energy, aware process. Okay, so I will give you, towards the end, the opportunity to ask one or two questions, but there are a couple of things I want to check with members of the panel. In one thing we found challenging, or we continue to find challenging in cybersecurity, are the legal aspects of it. So, when it goes wrong, who's responsible for it? Mm-hmm. Or should we have a legal system and a legal infrastructure that actually devise for each organization the route? So you have to work within that framework, because by law you have to do it. Should we do that, or should we carry on doing what we're doing and hoping that we will all be working together in an integrated approach, etc.? So who would like to start us with that one? The legal aspect and how it can help digital towards net zero. Ron, do you have any views on that?
Legal and Ron don't really go hand in hand because these legal guys are really, they're always interested in how much I'm going to pay them. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to constraining the development of IT and innovation, creativity, and you put a lawyer involved, nothing happens. Mm-hmm. So there is a role, but the role can actually stop the whole process. And we talked about collaboration. I love collaboration, but what I love more than collaboration is co-creation. Because co-creation, as my learned colleague and I are doing together, co-creation is two organizations working together create a greater result than that individual organization. So that's the co-creation that we're looking for, the innovation, the creativity, the new things that nobody knows. Now, the legal framework can actually slow the whole process down of innovation. And I know from myself, Ron, you can't do that. It's not legally correct. Ron, you can't do that. Now, I'll give you an example of an area of IoT that we're in choppy waters with at the moment. But fortunately, Gloucestershire is very forward-thinking from a police point of view of civil liberties. And the Active Building Centre are taking the technologies of the IoT platform and making a virtual prison. So rather than sending people to prison, we're saying, oh, Active Building Centre, we can create an environment that controls the guy. Rather than going to prison, we'll take some of your liberties away. You're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that. So that's stepping over the legal boundaries of liberties. But for me, well, go to prison, or you can do your custodial sentence at home, and the building, because it's intelligent, can start making informed decisions with AI, machine learning, of behaviours and patterns. And that's a real legal minefield that I've got no answer to at all.
I think you have a very good view. Well, at least it's a view. So thank you. Anyone else from members of the panel? Any views on the legal framework and whether we should have one or should have some guidance, legal guidance as to what needs to happen by X? Michael?
Yeah, I would say we do actually have one, and that is contractual frameworks in procurement, client design community relationships.
Is that going far enough, do you think?
So the thing is, when we look at BIM and why BIM as a integrated way of working hasn't probably gotten us to the point we were all hoping, is part of a liability framework that people are struggling to understand. And so let me give you an example. If I, as an architect, take information from a planner, then inherently there is an interdependency and there's a dependency on the correctness of the information that I'm basing my information on. We always have that. The same is true for what happens in construction. If I take on the information and take it as face value, I inherit information that I can't really control. So hence, what people tend to do is rework certain aspects of that to make sure they're in control, they understand it, and they can sign up and talk to their PI insurance in case it goes wrong and say, I'm in charge of this, and I can control this. So if you get into conversations that can be very unpleasant because certain pieces of information weren't correct, certain assumptions were made that are not correct, then there is a big question where the liability sits because you're working off a shared data set. So I think, yes, we need an understanding how we regulate this, but I think there is an awful lot in place, and we just need to understand that better again to make sure the interfaces are workable.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
I'd just pick an example or a story around BA Terminal 5, where they had that contractual thing. They had a challenge where they didn't know how they were going to build it because there were some real problems with the foundation, and I don't know, just the land was very poor. And they just changed the contract so that it was a team kind of risk and reward. So when a problem came, you'd done your piece, contractor A had done their bit with due diligence, but it didn't solve the problem. So everyone had to work towards resolving the problem because they all got reward, and they shared that reward. And they knew that they couldn't use the standard kind of contractual relationship. So you've got to be kind of creative if you're going to do challenging things, because they were in a project which was a bit blue sky. They didn't know how to do it. So if you go, I think structure and standards and things are very good in a very mature environment, but here we're not in a very mature environment. You're trying to do groundbreaking things really quickly, so you need flexibility, I think.
So flexibility is important, and we need flexibility, but wouldn't that lead to chaos if we don't have standards? I'm being, deliberately.
Yeah, yes and no. All right, I'll tell you another story, a school story. So I was looking after cyber for an organisation, and I just come out of a kind of senior leadership team talking about how we modify and close down access for certain things for priority. And then I went to my daughter's presentation at school. She just started at secondary school. And they said, we're giving, your child will be using the internet. They will see pornography. They will, this was my daughter I was listening to. And they were saying, but we think the value of using the internet for education outweighs the bad things. And we will train them and highlight and signpost the bad things that can happen, but we trust the people to use it effectively. So I thought that's a kind of very mature kind of way of looking at things in a school environment. But sometimes in organisations we try and restrict the use of innovative things.
Okay, very important point. Ali, you mentioned in your earlier introduction the development of software with sustainability as part of the design. And I think you refer to some form of benchmarking in measuring the quality of software. If, for example, it's using X amount of CPU, that's the processing power, then it's not good enough. So isn't that actually a standard? So we could say one of the parameters we will be looking at how good your software platform is, we look at your CPU usage. If it is beyond a certain limit, then it's not good enough. You have to go back and do it again. Would you think that that's the kind of benchmarks we should be using in software engineering?
Well, we do use that in the when we design any system, and in terms of how much energy we spend in the CPU, how much energy we spend on the transferring the data, and how much energy we spend on the other side of receiving the data on the server or the storage. And that combination to compare two different systems. But that's one of the factors. We have another factors in terms of the quality of the design, but that's not our business today. But we can use, also we have, we teach a topic, we call it computational mathematics, and we teach also optimization, which we have the mathematical behind that, and one of them is an annotation. Annotation, it's a measurement between two different algorithms when we design. And I would like to refer to one of the sector which are using the technology, and we back to referring to the role of digital, the financial sector. And you've heard a lot about the cryptocurrency, and I'm not going to mention one of them. It's one of the cryptocurrency mining. The power consumption is equivalent to Norway and Argentina country electricity, and that's a huge. And the reason behind cryptocurrency is going high because of the flexibility we have in the digital, and because of the lack on the current financial sector. There are lack behind the digital, so people, they prefer to use the cryptocurrency for that reason and invest that. But this is could lead to chaos. So I'm against that. Again, personally, I would like to have a framework for that to make it legal, because starting from 1 penny to £8,000 per one cryptocurrency, that's crazy. That's someone within this universe earning money from people who are not educated very well, or they are taking risk. On the other side, the cryptocurrency utilize something we call it a blockchain, and we have in the university a blockchain lab, but we are not dealing with the cryptocurrency because there are a lot of application we can use out of the blockchain. There are some power consumption, but on the other hand, we provide a service like a smart contract, like tracing the equipment, which when we have an active building, we have 100,000 devices, and we have to know these devices, there's traceability from manufacturing to. So that's kind of good, the good part or the role of the digital.
Good. So Ali, you are in favor of some form of standards,
Yeah, of course,
to give us a framework within which we at least can ascertain the quality of the design in terms of its net zero credentials.
of course.
Good. Ron.
Kamal, can I just say, to go back to the lawyers, I don't dislike them all, just some of them. However, standards are absolutely crucial. There's innovation is crucial, and they're actually parallel processes going together. You can innovate and create. However, the process of innovating and creating must involve documentation and writing down and creating the standard, because how do you create standard work or training unless you've got something to train to? So what we're doing, even through the innovation, is mapping what we do so we can create the standard of high and low, and that enables a training package to put together to say, to make it repeatable and reproducible. The two R's, it can only come from the standard. So part of our delivery mechanism is to create standards.
So Ron, from your experience, how shared a view is this in the community?
Well, it's on a personal view, there's an awful lot of people in this space that are quite ignorant or agnostic of what to do. And so certainly with you guys in the University of Gloucester, you're pushing the way ahead of the right standards. Most other people just get along and think cyber and threats don't exist. They're quite oblivious of it. So you're blazing the way.
Thank you. Michael.
I would add a point, which I totally agree with all of this. And there's three, I think, big packages, if you like, to make a net zero work. The first is development, and there's different degrees of innovation, and how we structure them is a whole challenge in itself, from basic to disruptive to breakthrough to sustaining, which our industry survives on a lot. The second is then deployment, and again, working with the Active Building Center, we're really working hard on getting a concept, which is in part quite academic and theoretical, but we know it can work, into real-world demonstrators so people can see it, touch it, feel it, and understand it better. Bring supply chain in to have them test their latest equipment. And that's another challenge. And then you get into dissemination. And events like today are a big part of this, in getting a shared understanding what needs doing, how we do it. But standards are a big part of that, because I have a certain way of talking about things. You have a certain way of talking about things. Someone else has another way of talking about things. And that's great, but it can very easily lead to a lot of misperception and confusion. And that's back to the carbon conversation. You know, we had one yesterday on another a panel with the Green Building Council, and it was about, can we understand a net zero approach by not really understanding embodied carbon versus operational carbon? And do we use the same, I see some nodding and some smiling and some gringing there. So it's you know, what equation is it that we're actually relying on? And do we understand that the same way? Do we use the same, you know, calculus, which is naturally embedded in some sort of algorithm, because it's way too complex to understand it all in one go. So I think these three aspects are important, and yes, I would agree that standards are quite helpful.
And I'm not going to ask you what was the answer to the question, do we understand that calculus bit? Because that may have been a session that lasted an hour in its own right, so we'll leave it for another day.
Sure.
So we talked about the standards, the need for integration, collaboration or co-creation. What are the risks in our journey towards making digital play a significant role in net zero? So what do you see the risks and challenges in your own environments? And if you can, please, would you say something about how aware are the people in your sector, in your environment, how aware are they of these risks and challenges? Who would like to start us on?
I'll start this one, Kamal.
Ron.
I'm going to answer this in two ways. One, I come from a military background, providing military equipment to sensitive places around the world, and we got breached, hacked by a foreign agent, and it was a serious issue. American company. My boss got taken up to Capitol Hill. It was a serious issue. We had to go through a lot of training, and that was my first view on is it real or not real. And there's a whole world out there that are looking to get a hold of information from each nation and country. There's teams, universities of people in China that send their people over to gather data and information. And what they're doing, what I was led from my intelligence briefing, was they're creating digital twins. And you think, no, that's not real, that's James Bond's. What is a digital twin? These guys are creating digital twins of our economies. Why are they doing that? Because they want to flex it. They want to use their AI to look at what the threat and weakness is in our critical infrastructure. Now, I'll just refer back to, there's a guy in America, I can't remember what part of the state he was in, but he's just resigned, a very senior figure in intelligence, because the US are 10 years behind China on AI and the threat attack, and it's a serious concern.
Ron, sorry to interrupt. Can you say a couple of words about what you mean by digital twins?
Oh, digital twin. Good point. Sorry if I use that word. What a digital twin is, creating a picture of something. That's the first twin for me. It's like taking a camera picture. And the way I always think of a digital twin is outside of cyber, but looking at a telescope. And if you look at the night sky, all these astronomers, they're looking for, right, I'll take a picture of this sky. And then over time they say, what's changed? So that ultimately that's what we're doing, or what people are doing with the digital twin, is taking a picture or a graphic or a BIM model of reality now. Now, the other model is what's changed. So you can actually set up as what has changed over time or what is going on, and use AI, machine learning, to look at the differences. And so that's what other people outside of the UK are trying to do, is understanding our critical national infrastructure and how to infect it. And that's part of the role of the Active Building Centre, and working with the Infrastructure Projects Authority, is to provide a platform. If we make, say, an MOD building active, and we connect lots of nodes together, that building and that group of building is safe, not only from cyber attacks, but also from physical people getting access to it, and the supply chain of materials that go into it. So that's our role.
Can you say a little bit more, Ron, about the risks and challenges? Okay, we create digital twins and digital twins.
Yeah.
So what are the risks?
So for me, a lot of the risks is security related to, you know, access to information and access to hacking in. You know, I think the sophistication of people out there is far bigger than we imagine. I use the word the dark web, and the dark web is where people reside. You know, sometimes kids playing, and there's a whole group of kids who download hacking tools and they share information. Oh, let's have a bit of fun and hack ABC. The tools to do the sophisticated espionage is out there right now. And, you know, I'm not aware of how to control it, to help. All I know is if we can put a system together that protects that, it's good. So it's real. I just can't see it. I don't know it. It's like quantum computing. It's quantum. It's there, but we can't see it. We don't know about it, but it's very real. It's difficult to find.
Thank you, Ron. Michael.
I'd add one to the risk conversation, and that's from the construction perspective. One of the really big discussion points all the time in construction is how to de-risk risky situations, because there's a lot of dangerous activity, especially in civils and heavy construction work and structures. There's a lot of heavy pieces of kit, and it's a dangerous environment sometimes. So then there's a lot of financial risk. If you're building a 50-story tower in the middle of London, you carry a huge financial risk. If you're building national infrastructure, you're building infrastructure that's critical to the operation of the nation. So you're taking on a lot of risk. And so risk mitigation is a really, really important part of that process. And I'll mention again the project that was Innovate UK funded, that's on display, and that we're collaborating on with the Active Building Centre, which is a quite sophisticated, I call it plug-and-play system for smart foundation systems in buildings. And what we're doing there, we're enhancing the technology in multiple ways, but one of the things we're looking at is to create that digital twin while we're creating the asset. And what that means is that we can monitor the performance in real time, and when we achieve the performance, we leave that part of the construction with a scan of what we have constructed. And then essentially, as soon as we have reached the performance criteria that we came to meet, that can stop, which means typically efficiencies and productivity, and eventually productivity equals profitability going up. That allows us to do more of the good work, but it actually means that we save materials, which is good for the net zero conversation, but it also allows us to have an as-built result in a digital twin, so we really understand what we've actually created, and that helps to de-risk the process in many ways. It helps us to understand what has been built. It helps the client to understand, yes, requirements have been met, and it helps with an improved sort of analytical mode towards those data sets to optimize that whole process. So back to your point of optimization. And I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, where it's not just about the construction of it. There's a much larger understanding of risk mitigation, finance, and again, the measuring of different value systems.
Brilliant. Ali.
Yeah, thank you very much. From the academic point of view, actually the risk is we don't need to reach to a point that we cannot provide the right skills to the market. And as you mentioned, there is a gap between this country and other countries, which is they have the resources. So in order to work in an innovative way, we have to work with our students from early stages and engage them with the industry. And that's what we do in the placement, ask them to go for 12 months working with the industry, and they come back at the final year project. They have the idea, they are mature, they have real problem with the industry, they can work with it. So that's how can we build boost their skills. Otherwise, it's as a colleague said, we will be in a problem if we don't have the skills at the right time. That is the issue. And we are trying to work harder or smarter with the industry to bring more real problems to our students with the staff. The other risk is the staff. The staff have to be up to date as well. We have challenges. Just every 6 months we have a new topic in the tech. Can you believe that? BIM, BOM.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot. And now the integration in our school, we have people working the creative computing, which is including the digital twin, BIM, BOM, and the other team working with the cybersecurity. The other one is with the cyber forensic. And then we have people developing software. We shouldn't be, we are not isolated. We are working together. Our courses, there are common between them. But even though we need to work smarter with the industry to provide the right skills. And this is the risk if we cannot meet that.
Thank you, Ali. Working smarter with industry. Question is, which industries? And maybe that's part of the my next and final question. Are there any sectors that have done this better than the digital sector? And what can we learn from these sectors? If there are no sectors, then hooray, we are in deep trouble. So we'll go Michael and then Peter.
Yeah, I'll throw a few thoughts in the mix. We are currently looking a lot at automotive and aerospace. And the argument is fairly consistently the same, that those industries are so advanced that the gap is too big. That's one. And the other is that, when you're building cars, you're building 5 million. We're only building this building once. So there's two arguments to be made. The most sophisticated car makers that I've had the joy of watching at Williams, for instance, is Formula One. And the argument, I think, is a strong one if you say that Formula One car, which is one of the most high-performance, beautiful technology achievements in the world, I'd say, is 95% bespoke. Yet it uses the most sophisticated predictive planning modes. It's de-risked to the T. It is costed to an incredible precision because it is costly, and when you're spending 90 million a year on developing 3 cars, you want to know what you're doing. So that's one. The other is aerospace, where again the argument is oftentimes it's too remote, it's too far out, it's too complex. We're currently doing work at Cambridge with a colleague from the Engineering Design Center, and he has a background in manufacturing and in aerospace engineering. And some of the work we're showing in our P+ capacity next door is active buildings that are wind powered, and that is deploying optimization principles that also come from aerospace. So there's some really tangible design examples of what that looks like and what the design impact is. But we're also looking at creating new tools, back to the idea of interdisciplinary collaboration, where we borrow from what's called aerospace value assessment methods. And we're combining that with interdisciplinary models we've developed initially in the States through DOE-funded work, for interdisciplinary work, architecture focused. The beauty about the value assessment methods is that they can simultaneously simulate and visualize interdependencies between systems that are not that different from what we do. It's all about controlling environments, it's about structure, it's about resistance to airflow. So a lot of things we do in buildings, but they can visualize relationships very, very well. So they can compare, in what we call a multi-objective optimization approach, these different value systems to great precision, and they can visualize them all in one go in quite complex graphics, but if you know how to read them, you understand the relationships much better. And that is a sort of complex piece of work, but if we just step back and say, can we extract the principles and do more of that technology transfer between disciplines, then we can learn an awful lot step by step.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Michael. I'm sure some of you will know that over the last 200 years or so, there was no new science. We just used existing science in different way, the principles. So we can get principles from aerospace, car industry, and use it in our own environment if we can find the way to do it. So that's very helpful, Michael. Peter.
So my background, I've done a lot of IT management within international charities. And when I first moved from private sector to charities, the novelty, I suppose, was that you could collaborate and talk to your competitors with ease. And then you had to, in the sense that you had a lack of resource and a real need to innovate quickly. And technology in a charity is really low down the value chain, in the sense that it's competing for program work. So it meant there was a need to collaborate. And how to do digital transformation in that environment, we worked with the tech industry, we brought them together. We looked at the key problems that we had, and we looked at how technology could affect the common goal of all of us as international charities. So you had the Millennium Development Goals. So you had a real target that was well understood and agreed by the whole organisation. And I think that shared goal, I think, is a key thing. And then after that, we built, we looked at pain points. We did a little bit of like what ABC are doing, built a solution centre, working, so getting best practice, getting blueprints. And then that enabled us to basically have a costed model of a solution that we could put behind us and sell in and get funding for, actually, external funding. And then we could do that at scale. And what we did is effectively embed digital in the delivery of the program work. Yeah. So you can do it, but I think it's bringing that all together and having the shared goal, diverse sets of interests, and bringing in all the partners, including the technology, all the stakeholders really, and then bringing the finance in finally to make it happen.
Thank you, Peter. It's very helpful indeed. Some words are coming back again and again. I think multidisciplinarity, collaboration, co-creation, the heaven scenario. We can't do this in isolation, and it needs to be a combination of efforts from different parts. I don't think I had a clear steer about whether we need a legal framework or not, but there was some agreement about the standards and the needs for standards in our journey towards net zero, and the role we play as people from the digital world. Maybe I should unshamefully say that the University of Gloucestershire is the #1 university for sustainability. And we don't do that by teaching students, about sustainability. That happens, that's part of it, but it's about the procurement, about the work that colleagues do in terms of general behaviors within the institution. Everyone within the organization has to behave in a way that will take us, towards this net zero. And the work that is done in relation to this particular debate is about the digital side of things. How do we make sure that we have people who will influence their environments in the future? So we've got 2-3 minutes for any questions from the audience. This is an opportunity, not a threat. If you can say your name, please.
I'm Andrew Jeffries, and I'm a consultant at the Active Building Centre. I'm going to pose a sort of devil's advocate question to you, which is that in the British construction industry, we've got domestic housing, and we've got all the other stuff, the commercial and so on. I can see that all the commercial type stuff is complicated, and there's huge scope for it to be low energy or not to be low energy. When it comes to the domestic construction sector, 200,000-300,000 houses a year, which are basically crap, they're built as crap. To what extent should those domestic constructions be not digital? Because I'm saying, if you look at the current housing stock, most of it is 50 to 100 years old. The houses that we build today have to last for a long time and have to be low-tech. They have to be inherently net zero, not net zero because they got whizzy electronic features. Because electronic features in 20 years' time will be out of date. You can go out and build a net zero house today using current construction methods if you are minded to, that is blooming good, doesn't cost an awful lot different from a crack house, and the running costs of it are less than most people are prepared to spend on their mobile phones and their Sky subscriptions today. So, and that's without any digital at all, they're just decent houses.
Okay.
So, to what extent should the 300,000 houses that we're supposed to be building each year now actually be digital, or should we be aiming for them to be not digital, but just be blooming good, so they don't need digital to be sticking plasters on a crap house?
So, how can we build blooming good domestic houses without always digital, but certainly not crap houses? Who would like to?
I'll take that gladly. So again, I'd say looking from an architectural perspective and the delivery side of things, I would perfectly agree that you don't need all the sophistication, all the bells and whistles and the digital. There's many ways of producing really good buildings without that degree of sophistication or the other things. Now I'll take the other stand. I'm living in a Victorian house from 1860, and I've done an awful lot of work on that house. And if I had access to a digital twin from 1860, I would look at it gladly. Because you find things, you have no idea how it's put together. You're worried about asbestos, where you send samples to the lab and you stop for a week because you don't know what you're finding. You happily continue because it's actually hair from horses that were used to reinforce the ceilings that were built at the time. But there's if you think of back to this whole idea of a whole life cycle view towards buildings, when you have more sophisticated buildings, it's really good to do what we have in products, where we have a user manual. I was part of a large refurbishment project at the Treasury in Westminster, and we had to produce maintenance manuals at the end of it, so that if someone had to prepare a maintenance regime for these beautiful environmentally responsive louver systems we had introduced and naturally vented atriums and so on, they would know what to find behind layers and layers of grills and steelwork and cladding. And that is quite helpful, and I think that's where it defeats the argument a little bit, because the biggest argument I would have in response to that is our buildings need to be more adaptable. And when you look at a design life of 50, 60, 70, 80 years in residential, we're getting to 2050 in half of that building's life. We're struggling to meet the requirements for 2050, but if we can't in 2050 say, it would be really great to update this part, to exchange certain components, to exchange the heating and cooling system if it has one in commercial or mixed-use settings, then we're missing a trick. And I think for that you need, if you can have access to it, something like a digital documentation that helps you understand where you're taking it in the next step.
Thank you. Very helpful. One last question. Just one.
Hi, so I'm Anthony Morgan, CEO for Power Transition. So we're actually sort of working in the digital space. And one of the questions I had was actually, by the way, fascinating and really good chat. So I've learned quite a bit myself today. So, but what the point was just around legislation, because innovation is always going to be ahead of legislation.
Yeah.
And you put legislation in place too fast, and what you're doing is you're going to hamper the innovation.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't put innovation in place, what happens is what's happened with the crypto world, and you end up with using more energy than Iceland for one cryptocurrency, or more energy than USA for all cryptocurrencies by 2027, which is where it's headed at the moment. So the point is, what time is the right time to legislate?
Very good point. Very good question. I'm not going to say, Ron, what do you think?
Yeah, For me, it's I answer this question as with something called TRL levels. I'm not sure if you know TRLs, technology readiness level, and ultimately it's relating to that. So TRL level 1 is a dream. You get the TRL level 3, which is producing a proof of concept. You know, you would not legislate on a proof of concept. But then as it matures down the TRL levels, you get to that minimum viable product. You say, okay, I've got to start putting some standards together, some processes that actually work. And then the further you go down the process, before it's commercialised, there is a time then you say, I'm happy now, I've done my beta site testing, this is as stable as it's going to get, this is repeatable and reproducible, I now want to benchmark it, do me digital twin, do me data point, and I believe, you know, it's that stage that you put in legislation when it's mature enough not to change and you can control it.
Thank you very much indeed, and I think with those wise words, I'm afraid we came to the end of this fascinating debate. So my thanks to panelist members, Ali, Ron, Peter and Michael for taking part in this debate, which is hosted by the Active Building Centre in association with the University of Gloucestershire. So I think time probably for lunch or other things. I don't want to stand between you and your snacks. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.